Robert, it is an absolute honor to have you here. Number one, thank you for your service. From what I was reading, you have lived. And when I say lived, like you really lived in a way that I don't even think is possible in modern day society anymore. I mean, when I saw born in 1936, I don't throw it out there to just address age. What I mean is the amount of things you've seen and the amount of things that have happened in the world. It
What you consider, I've been on every continent on Earth,
right.
all 50 states.
And not only that, you're a very decorated officer who was even a part of Vietnam, which I mean, I don't have to say much on that. I that's a big deal, you know. You've won the Legion of Merit. I mean, I could go on with the accolades here, but thankfully, we're all lucky enough that you've written a book about it called The Journey. And if you'd allow me to, I'd like to sort of discuss this journey from the book. If you can, why don't we start by you sharing with me what sort of inspired you to write the book? Because a lot of people live a life and then don't bother to write a book. It's a lot of work. So, what was the difference for
It
you?
is. Well, on my birthday in 1915, my brother died. There were only two Brookses, he and I had two sons. So all that was left was me and my two sons. And I asked myself, do I have anyone else out there? So I went to Ancestry. And before I even got the results from Ancestry, I received a call from a lady whose name was Jeanette Brooks. And she asked me if I knew someone named Emily and Jenny Lee Brooks. I said, yes, it's my mother and father. And she screamed, Uncle Bobby. From that point, we talked for about an hour on the phone. She told me she was from Atlanta and that I had relatives in Atlanta, Savannah, Milledgeville, Philadelphia, and Ohio with the last name Brooks.
Wow.
So after that, I knew I had to travel. The one in Philadelphia was my sister. I didn't know I had a sister in Philadelphia, but it was from my dad's first marriage. So I immediately went to Philadelphia and met her and all of those associated with her, which told me I had nephews, great nephews, and grandnephews and nieces throughout Philadelphia that I didn't know about. And she told me about those in Atlanta. Well, after we spent the day there and I talked with her, I came home and then the next trip to Atlanta. And we traveled to Milledgeville. And I found out that there were Brookses all over the place. And I was the patriarch. Nobody knew me. And I knew nobody. Thus, a reason to write this book. This is me.
Wow. Well said. I can see that the book is going to have a great, great voice to it. Look, in my notes, I have that you grew up in Pittsburgh during the 40s and the 50s. Now,
Yes.
needless to say, that was not the easiest time to grow up anywhere, let alone, I imagine, Pittsburgh. Can you sort of speak about the idea of resilience in those times? Because let's face it, you needed that to get through those times.
Pittsburgh, I think it's more prejudiced than Birmingham, Alabama. It's a difficult place to live. But of course, being a youngster, I didn't know that. But as years passed and I went to school, I learned things, some good, some bad. And I began to appreciate the fact that there was this thing called prejudice. And I had to live with it. That influenced my lifestyle, my desire to learn, my desire to be educated, and my desire to succeed. So it's also the reason I left Pittsburgh.
Could you elaborate on that a little?
Well, Pittsburgh is a very difficult place for anyone of color to advance beyond a local labor workforce. At the time, when I was a teenager, Pittsburgh was a city of microcosms, a Black community, Italian community, Hungarian community, Jewish community, Chinese community, and they didn't overlap. And this to me didn't seem real. So rather than try and swim my way through this megalopolis of different communities, I wanted to try something else. This gave me reason to leave Pittsburgh and reach out to the world to say, is the rest of the world like this? And guess what? It isn't. And I learned that.
And is this where your consideration for the service came into mind as a way out?
Yes, yes, because I tried to find jobs that weren't in it. So I said, well, there's one place I know I can get a job and get paid every month. So I talked to my mother, who cried as she signed the papers to send me to the military. But that was a step I felt I needed to take because I had to get out of Pittsburgh and didn't have a nickel in my pocket or a friend that I could reach for. I had to do it on my own. And that was the step I took.
Did school in any way prepare you for this? Because I remember being in high school around 2007 is when I graduated, and I remember having recruiters show up that year trying to get us to go. Was it like that even then?
Never. But you know, there's a word, it's called dispassionate. And dispassionate has a meaning that says calm, impartial, find, influential, without being excessive in any of those areas. And disproportionate is a word that I have thrived with all my life to try to remain in those different genres. And it has provided success. So I was in a school that was predominantly Caucasian. We had very good teachers who motivated you to learn. And I was an A student. I learned. And that paid dividends in the long run. And then by remembering that word, disproportionate, I fitted in almost any category with no difficulty by remaining calm and impartial.
Fascinating. So then you take this disposition with you into the army, if I'm reading my notes here correctly. Did that serve your ability to
Well, you
move
better believe it did. You know, in 1954 was when the Army finished integrating as a result of a dictate by President Truman that said, integrate the Army. So I was with the first group that went into an integrated battalion. That was interesting.
Can you elaborate on
Yes.
integration? I'm not familiar with the idea of an
Well,
integrated
there were
army.
black battalions
I
and
see.
white battalions. They put them together and integrated those battalions. Some of the people didn't like that. So here again, the word disproportionate became very important. How to fit in to be calm, impartial, and smile, even when sometimes it hurts. And what was the result? I moved ahead of everybody.
This is what led to, if I understand correctly, multiple tours in Vietnam.
No, that's not what led to it. The multiple tours in Vietnam was because Vietnam existed. Well, you know, I was in Germany in the 8th Infantry Division, and I was the stenographer for the commanding general. Don't ask me how I got there. They just always pick me for stuff like that. But he walked in one day and he looked at me and he says, go downstairs and sign your paperwork. You're going to OCS. I said, oh. I didn't volunteer. Yeah, General, and you're a sergeant. What do you tell the general? You say, yes, sir. You go downstairs, you sign the papers. And I went to OCS and I got commissioned as a second lieutenant in the infantry. And I stayed there for a while as a cadre for other OCS students, and then went to Ranger School, and then went to helicopter school. And I found out that my eyeballs didn't allow me to fly helicopters. And they sent me to Special Forces and didn't volunteer for that. That was after they sent me to Ranger School. Didn't volunteer for that. So I was selected like sort of a puppet on strings. I didn't volunteer for anything except the Army. But I was sent to OCS. I did volunteer for jump school. I volunteered to be a parachutist. I'll admit that. But I didn't volunteer to go to OCS. I didn't volunteer to go to Ranger School. I didn't volunteer to go to Special Forces. And by no means did I volunteer to go to Vietnam. But it all happened. This dispassionate, all of a sudden it has a real meaning now, because you have to accept all of this and continue with calm, reserved personality if you wish to develop more in life and gain something from what you're going through.
Is there a particular moment you felt your disposition for being dispassionate was truly tested there?
Oh, yes, quite often, because there are many times when I had names other than my own. These were names that were prejudicial, biased. And it was sometimes very difficult to walk away, but important that I did. And it taught me many things about people. And when you don't say anything and you walk away, you have left someone wondering what they did. Of course, I didn't realize that until all of a sudden someone told me, he says, you know, when I first saw you, I didn't see you. I saw a black man. But Bob, you're different. I wish more black men were like you. That's a prejudicial statement, but it paid dividends for my personality.
Yeah. You know,
Dispassion, very important.
it's funny we can fast forward even to today just temporarily here as we traverse through your story, and statements like that are still being made
Yes.
in some rooms, and in other rooms concerted efforts have been made to move away from those things. um I can't imagine what it was like navigating segregation and racial prejudice, both in the military and in civilian life. That has to have shaped the way you view the world to this very day.
Yes, it has. It builds a certain amount of caution that you have to practice. I'm sorry to say,
Oh,
because you'll go places. For instance, I'm in a bowling league of 80 people. I'm the only black person in that league. When I first went in that league, there were a lot of questions. And finally, as a result of being dispassionate, I was elected as president of that league. So this told me something about how people react to how you act. And it allowed me to understand why I was selected so many different times for so many different things. Why did someone walk up to me and say, I want you on the board of directors for this bank? I don't know, but it has to do with that funny little word. You know, why was I selected to be a member of the Maryland State Police crime prevention squad. Why was I selected to be a vice president at a famous college and university? Dispassion. That's all I can say. It had to be the controls developed within my personality as a result of being dispassionate in the face of the obstacles that faced a black man in America.
I see what we're getting at here. There seems to be a thread as to the reason why you were put into positions of leadership, even outside of your decorated service. It seems to have continued in that way. And from what I'm gathering, you're saying the only thing you can think of that was the common thread through all that was your disposition to be dispassionate, disproportionate. Those those moments where you consciously made the decision not to react to whatever someone else's experience was and to have a beat
Yeah.
in between that.
I have to believe that there's that calm attitude and the smile and walk away. It pays dividends. It's hard because sometimes you want to retaliate, but from that, you gain nothing. From what I did, I gained everything.
And this was a disposition you had even before gaining the discipline that one earns being in service. That,
Yes,
that's what makes this so interesting. How was it compounded by the discipline? Does that discipline from the Army carry with you into the leadership you drive towards?
certainly it does. Certainly it does. Army leadership is something that is unknown to a multitude. They teach you how to work with all kinds of people under all types of circumstances, many of which are painfully nerve wracking, disrupting, and confusing. And when you're able to navigate through that, you learn much about not only them, but yourself. What am I capable of accepting? And what am I not capable of accepting? And how do I handle that? And over the years, practice doesn't make perfect, but it does make most things tolerable.
Now, one thing we haven't really addressed, which I think is a big elephant in the room throughout these conversations, because we're kind of flying through the time periods here, but there was a lot of
Mhm.
loss. There was a lot of loss in between these different decades.
Yes,
And I'm just curious, you sort of address this in the book, the loss and rediscovery, according to my notes here. What were some of the hardest moments I'm assuming one of them has to be Vietnam, goes without
yes.
saying, but in the general scope of things, what were some of the hardest moments for you to manage where you had to fight to keep that disposition in the face of that?
In Vietnam, as I found in Germany, the American soldiers carried their prejudices with them and made sure that there were certain clubs that you were not welcomed in. And the people would tell you certain times you go in a club and they would say, no, you can't sit out here because we'll lose patrons. We have another place you can go. Yes, this is a foreign country where American soldiers carried their prejudices with them to these foreign countries. And in order for these people in the foreign countries who own clubs that were attended by the military, they had to make certain concessions in order to keep their clientele up. However, dispassionate, I found that I could go to those clubs and I had my own private room and entertainments. Why? I got along with the people exceptionally well. In every case, in Germany and in Vietnam. Of course, I spoke the languages in both countries. That helped.
Language is always a
But
bridge. Yeah.
yes. And what I found was that you can be, even in a foreign language, you can be dispassionate. Very easy, very respectful. You don't talk to them, you don't talk down to them as they are a foreigner. You must understand you are the foreigner and act accordingly. And it pays dividends. So I enjoyed every foreign country I went to. And I've been to a whole bunch of them around the world. Like I said, I've been on every continent except Antarctica.
There's a really interesting dynamic that's being painted while we're talking that I'm observing, where one would argue, that's kind of going through life too humble. How does one lead from that humility? And yet, many of the most successful people in the world will tell you servant leadership is a thing to come from that place. And that's the term they use in corporate and in entrepreneurship. But
Very familiar with servant leadership.
yeah, yeah, but there's something to be said about using the term dispassionate. It's very and forgive me for lack of a better context. There's almost a Buddhist, a Zen. There's almost this centered point of gravity to the way that you've illustrated this disposition in life that you've carried with you. And
Mm.
did you always feel, it sounds like you mostly felt in control of your life by adhering to that as opposed to being pushed around by life. Am I understanding this correctly?
I think that's true because as a teenager in Pittsburgh, there were gangs. I stayed away from them. There were drugs. Stayed away from them. There were fights. Why? I'm not quite sure. But I have to believe that what I had at home gave me such comfort to a point where I didn't need those things. So I attribute all of that to my mother, all of it.
And what was your mother's name?
Emily,
Emily. Yeah.
beautiful woman.
Amazing.
She's European, believe it or not.
Really nice.
Yeah. She told me she was if you'll notice in my book, I asked my brother, who's this white woman talking about? She's my mother. She said, I'm not white, I'm just lighter than you. Well, she's European. And sat straight like the cat out of the bag.
I love that you did that. So
That
many
is why I'm 35% European.
fascinating. Fascinating. I don't think enough people have explored that, and I'm glad that you did, especially if we sort of tie the way this conversation started to where it is now. You thought it was just you and your brother, and then it turns out there was an entire ecosystem of family that existed, and the inspiration for being able to take the time to squeeze the wisdom that you've earned in your life. And it brings us to now where, and you sort of alluded to this, young people, they're in a world right now where everything is the opposite of dispassionate. Everything is trying to push you to an extreme, right? Politically, emotionally, intellectually, technologically, everything is at the extremes. If you had to take a moment to think about what you'd hope readers, especially younger generations, could take from reading about your journey in your book, The Journey, what would you hope that they walk away with?
An understanding that you cannot be influenced by others' emotions. You have to be respectful even when sometimes it hurts because it teaches you how to deal with people. It is hard sometimes to raise your head up and walk in to some places and be stared at. Like in California, believe it or not, walk into this restaurant with a white lieutenant colonel. I was a captain, and he had a sergeant major, and he refused to serve us because of me. California. I smiled and I said, well, thank you. I said, I shall find another restaurant because I'm hungry and I got up and left. What else can you do? I could have raised Cain. I could have called him names. I could have done a lot of things and gained what? But from that, I gained satisfaction. So I left. Now, how did they feel? I don't know. But they had very little reason to be negative. And that
That,
was all I was concerned.
that's such a fascinating disposition to take because, especially in today's world, you go on social media, it's like, and I brought this up just before you gave that answer, and it's completely the opposite. Everyone cares so much about the way everyone else views the world and what are they doing and how can they live this way. And I mean, they lose sleep. They're taking medication to deal with the stress, or everyone's living this medicated life. And I'm not, even Charles Bukowski was medicated, but it was for a different collection of stresses. But
Yeah.
but it's so fascinating to hear that you lived this way and had this disposition. At any point in time, did anyone try to accuse you of not caring enough?
No,
And even if they did, you probably wouldn't
that
have
was my
listened to
wife's
them.
kid.
Yeah.
That was for a different reason.
Right, right, right. No, the only reason
Other
I
than that,
ask,
no.
it's just
As a
there's,
matter of fact,
yeah,
my grandchildren show pure love. I mean, so much that I wonder sometimes, what did I do to gain all of that love and respect? It's a tremendously warm feeling because there's nothing greater than love. Even the Bible says God is love, and from there descends all the rest of our feelings. But I'm a minister.
right.
But you know, it's very difficult to explain how you develop your personality other than constantly remembering be dispassionate. Be dispassionate. Don't make decisions about other people. Let them make decisions about themselves. Just help them.
You know,
And I've lived for almost 89 years with that attitude, and I don't have to look back.
it's wonderful to hear that you had this anchor so early on in your life and this awareness to have an anchor so early on in life. So many people are like blades of grass in the wind, swaying whichever direction the wind blows. And it's important to hear your story and the things that occurred simply because of that disposition and your steadfastness and your capacity to focus on that as a quality that you the fact that you cared about a quality in your character at all. I
Well,
think
you have to add to that quality. You need to be educated. That's got to be part of it. I'm not saying have a college degree. Education takes on many forms: social, um, familial, well read, and of course, as much school as you can possibly get. It all has to go together. And how you do that has a lot to do with how you develop.
now if you could go back to your 17-year-old self and you had that ability to do so, would you change anything about the way that you moved in the world, or is there some advice you would leave behind?
What would I change? The only thing I would do is say, if you can afford to, which I could, get as much education as you can up front, and then dispassionately attack the world.
Such a fascinating concept. The entire there is this idea that I want to make sure is completed and coalesced as our conversation begins to close. And when someone hears the word dispassionate, I know that's not the sense, but when someone hears the word dispassionate, it almost seems like a passive state, and yet it's the very state that allows you to take action when it matters most. Am I understanding this correctly?
You do? Because calm, supported, not influenced by emotion and trauma, objective, neutral, and fair. All that falls into the word compassion, dispassion.
Bob, thank you so much for stopping by.
Thanks for allowing me to stop by. I really appreciate having the opportunity to talk with you.